Mom, Dad, we are moving to Carrie's mother's house in the city, and her brother is going to live on your farm with his family. It was Carrie's decision, and it's final. This was declared by Brandon, my only son, the boy, my husband Larry, and I gave every ounce of our love. You know, that feeling when you just know something is about to change, that specific heaviness in the air that tells you the life you knew yesterday is about to disappear. I felt that the moment my son, Brandon, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He never calls on Tuesdays. He usually texts, or I have to chase him down just to hear his voice. But this time, he called me. His voice was tight, clipped, and serious. He said he and his wife, Carrie, were coming over for dinner on Saturday. He said they had something important to discuss. Naturally, my mind went straight to the best possible scenario. I'm 64 years old. My husband, Larry, and I have been waiting for grandchildren for what feels like a lifetime. Brandon and Carrie have been married for 4 years. Every time they visit, I find myself looking at Carrie's stomach or waiting for that special smile, the one that says our family is growing. I told myself that this was it. That was why he sounded so serious. He was probably nervous to tell us the good news. I threw myself into the preparations. I wanted everything to be perfect. If they were giving us good news, I wanted to celebrate it with the food Brandon grew up on. I spent the entire day in the kitchen. I woke up before the sun, pulling out the heavy cast iron pots that belonged to my mother. I went to the butcher in town to get the best cut of beef for a pot roast. I spent hours chopping carrots, peeling potatoes, and making sure the gravy was rich and thick, just the way Brandon likes it. My feet were throbbing by noon, but I didn't care. I made his favorite dessert, a pecan pie from scratch. I shelled the pecans myself, sitting on the back porch, watching the wind move through the fields of our farm. This farm has been our life. It's where Brandon learned to walk, where he learned to drive a tractor, where he became a man. I thought about how wonderful it would be to see a grandchild running through those same fields. The thought gave me a burst of energy. I scrubbed the dining room table until the wood gleamed. I ironed the good tablecloth, the one with the lace edges we only use for Christmas and Easter. Larry came in from the barn around 4 o'clock, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He looked at the table set for 4, at the flowers I had cut from the garden, and he smiled. "You're going all out, Brittany," he said, kissing my cheek. "You really think this is the big news?" "I can feel it, Larry," I told him, smoothing down my apron. Why else would they insist on a sit-down dinner? Brandon sounded different on the phone. "Ready." Larry showered and put on his nice button-down shirt, the blue one that matches his eyes. We sat in the living room, waiting. The house smelled amazing, like savory beef, thyme, and the sweet, sugary scent of the cooling pie. It smelled like home. It smelled like love. When their car finally crunched up the gravel driveway, my heart did a little flutter. I watched through the window as they parked next to Larry's truck. They sat in the car for a moment before getting out. I saw Brandon gripping the steering wheel, his head down. Carrie was saying something to him, her hands moving fast like she was giving instructions. That should have been my first warning. If you're coming to tell your parents you're having a baby, you don't need a pep talk in the driveway. You don't look like you're marching into battle. I opened the front door before they even knocked. "There they are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and welcoming. "Come on in, the food is hot." Brandon walked in first. He looked tired. He's my son. I know every line on his face, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He gave me a quick, one-armed hug, barely squeezing back, and walked right past me into the living room. He didn't say, "Hi, Mom," or "It smells great." He just mumbled a hello to his father. Then came Carrie. She was wearing heels, which always made me nervous on our hardwood floors, and a sharp white blazer that looked like it cost more than my first car. She stood in the doorway for a second, looking around the entryway like she was inspecting a hotel room she wasn't satisfied with. "Hi, Carrie," I said, reaching out to hug her. She stiffened, giving me a quick pat on the back before pulling away. She wrinkled her nose, sniffing the air dramatically. "Hi, Brittany." "Wow, it smells strong in here." "It's the pot roast," I said proudly. "Brandon's favorite." "No," Carrie said, brushing a speck of invisible dust off her sleeve. "I mean the house. It smells like old wood. And wet dog. I don't know how you stand it out here. The air is so heavy." My smile faltered. Our dog, Buster, hadn't been inside all day. The house was spotless. It smelled like lemon polish and dinner. But I swallowed the insult. I wasn't going to let her ruin the night. "Well, come sit down. You must be hungry after the drive." We moved to the dining room. I had placed Brandon at the head of the table, his old spot. I started serving the food, piling high mounds of mashed potatoes and tender beef onto their plates. I waited for Brandon's eyes to light up. He used to sneak bites before I even sat down, but tonight, he just stared at the plate like he didn't know what it was. "So," Larry said, trying to break the ice, "how's work, son? You guys busy at the firm?" Brandon poked at a carrot with his fork. "It's fine, Dad. Busy. You know how it is." "And you, Carrie?" I asked. "How are things at the agency?" Carrie didn't answer immediately. She had her phone out, sitting right next to her plate. Her thumb was scrolling through emails or social media, the blue light reflecting on her face. "Carrie," Brandon said softly. She looked up, annoyed. "What?" "Oh, work is fine. Actually, it's better than fine. I'm up for a promotion. That's part of why the commute is getting so impossible. Driving all the way out here feels like a trek to another planet." I gripped my fork a little tighter. "It's only 45 minutes, Carrie." "It feels like hours," she sighed, finally taking a small bite of the roast. She chewed it slowly, looking at the wall. "This is very hearty, isn't it? Lots of salt." "It's the recipe Brandon loves," I said, my voice sounding a little thin to my own ears. The dinner continued like that for 20 minutes. Painful. Slow. Every attempt Larry or I made to connect was met with one-word answers or complaints about the heat, the drive, or the silence of the countryside. Carrie kept checking her watch. Brandon kept drinking water, refilling his glass 3 times. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at his father. He kept glancing at Carrie, like he was waiting for a signal. My stomach started to turn. The excitement I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold dread. This wasn't a happy visit. People with good news don't act like they are at a funeral. They don't insult the hostess. They don't avoid eye contact. I decided to rush to the best part. Maybe sugar would sweeten the mood. Maybe once the pie was on the table, the tension would break. "Who's ready for dessert?" I asked, forcing a bright smile. I made pecan pie, with the pecans from the trees out back. I stood up and went to the sideboard to get the pie. It was beautiful, golden brown, smelling of toasted nuts and syrup. I brought it to the table and set it down in the center. I picked up the silver pie server, the one my mother gave me for my wedding. "Brandon, I know you want a big slice," I said, hovering the knife over the crust. "Mom," Brandon said. His voice cracked. I froze. "What is it, honey?" "Whipped cream. I have some in the fridge." "No," he said. He put his hand flat on the table. "Don't cut the pie." The room went dead silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to get louder. Carrie finally put her phone down, face up on the table. She crossed her arms and leaned back, a look of bored expectation on her face. "We didn't come here to eat, Mom," Brandon said. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were watery, but hard. We didn't come here for dinner. I slowly lowered the knife. My hands were shaking. I looked at Larry. He was sitting up straight, his jaw tight. He sensed it too. The bomb was about to drop. Then why did you come? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. Brandon took a deep breath. He looked at Carrie, and she gave him a sharp nod, like a commander ordering a soldier to fire. We made a decision, Brandon said, about our living situation, and about the farm. The farm? Larry asked, his voice rough. What about the farm? You don't live on the farm. Not yet, Carrie interjected. Her voice was cool, smooth, and terrifyingly calm. Mom, Dad, Brandon said, rushing the words out now. We're selling our house. We're moving. Moving? I asked, confused. Moving where? To Carrie's mother's house, Brandon said. In the city. I blinked. Carrie's mother lived in a massive, modern house downtown. Okay, I said slowly. If that helps you save money, but what does that have to do with the farm? Brandon looked at his plate again. He couldn't say it. Carrie sighed, loud and impatient. Oh, for heaven's sake, Brandon. Just tell them. She looked directly at me, her eyes cold and flat. We're moving to my mom's. And my brother Greg is moving here. He's moving onto your farm. I dropped the pie server. It clattered against the china plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. What? I whispered. It's already decided, Carrie said, picking up her fork and finally taking a bite of the potatoes. Greg needs a place. You guys are getting too old to manage all this land anyway. He'll be here on Monday. I looked at my son. He just stared at the tablecloth. And in that moment, the smell of the pecan pie didn't smell like love anymore. It smelled like betrayal. The silence in the dining room was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The silver pie server was lying on the china plate, where I dropped it, a jagged line of pecan filling smeared across the porcelain. I stared at it because I couldn't bear to look at my son. I couldn't bear to see the face of the boy I had carried, birthed, and raised sitting there and letting his wife tear our lives apart. Greg, Larry asked. His voice was rough, like he had swallowed gravel. He wasn't looking at Carrie. He was looking straight at Brandon. Your brother-in-law? That Greg? Yes, Dad, Brandon said, finally lifting his head. He looked miserable, I'll give him that. But misery doesn't excuse cowardice. Look, just hear us out. It's complicated. It's not complicated at all, Carrie interrupted, leaning forward. Her blazer rustled, a sharp, synthetic sound in the quiet room. It's actually very logical. Brandon and I have been crunching the numbers. The commute from our current place to the city is killing us. It's 2 hours a day wasted in traffic. 2 hours we could be working, networking, building our futures. My mother has a townhouse right in the city center. It's 5 minutes from my office and 10 from Brandon's firm. She's offered to let us live there, rent-free, so we can save for our forever home. I tried to process this. My son, a grown man with a law degree, moving back in with his mother-in-law to save money. It seemed odd, but if that was their choice, fine. That was their life. Okay, I said slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. If you want to live with your mother, that's your business. But I still don't understand what this has to do with us. Or with Greg. Carrie sighed. The kind of sigh you give a toddler who refuses to put on their shoes. Brittany, please try to keep up. My mother's townhouse isn't a mansion. It's a 3-bedroom. Right now, Greg and his wife, Linda, are staying in the guest suite. For us to move in, they have to move out. So Greg needs an apartment. Larry said, sounds like Greg's problem. Greg is in transition, Brandon said quickly, jumping in to defend his wife's family. He's looking for the right opportunity. Rents are skyrocketing. Dad, you know that. He can't just find a place overnight with no steady income. He's unemployed again? I asked. I knew the answer. Greg was always in transition. He was 40 years old and had transitioned through more jobs than I had fingers. He is an entrepreneur. Carrie snapped. And he needs a place to land. But this isn't just about Greg. This is about you too. She gestured around the room, waving her hand at my clean walls, my polished furniture, the life I had built. Look at this place. It's massive. You have the main house, the barn, the acreage. We came here today, and I saw Larry limping when he walked to the truck. I saw how tired you looked, Brittany, standing over that stove all day. I was cooking for you, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I was tired because I wanted to make a nice meal for my family. Exactly, Carrie said, nodding as if I had just proved her point. You're exhausting yourselves. You're two people in your 60s trying to run a working farm. It's irresponsible. You need help. You need a property manager. I looked at Larry. His face was turning a shade of red I hadn't seen in years. A property manager? He spat. I've managed this land since before you were born, little girl. I don't need a manager, especially not one who can't hold down a job at a hardware store. Greg has experience. Carrie lied smoothly. He's very handy. The plan is simple. Greg and Linda move in here. They take over the heavy lifting, mowing the acreage, fixing the fences, handling the maintenance. In exchange, they live here. They get a roof over their heads, and you get free labor. It's a win-win. Where? I asked. The word came out sharp. Where do they live? I thought maybe she meant the old trailer down by the creek, or maybe they wanted to convert the loft in the barn. Carrie looked at me like I was being dense. In the house, Brittany. Obviously. The barn isn't insulated for a family. They'll take the upstairs. You two don't use the second floor anyway, except for storage. Brandon's old room is just sitting there gathering dust. The guest room is empty. It's a complete waste of square footage. My mouth fell open. You want your brother to live in my house. With us. To share my kitchen? My bathroom. It's plenty of space, Carrie said, dismissing my horror with a wave of her manicured hand. You'll barely know they're here. Linda is very quiet. And think about the security. Two elderly people alone out here, in the middle of nowhere. It's not safe. Having a younger man in the house is a safety precaution. Elderly. She called us elderly. I am 64. I hike 3 miles a week. I run a garden that feeds half the neighborhood. I felt a fire ignite in my belly that I hadn't felt in a long time. No, I said. The word hung in the air. Carrie blinked. She stopped scrolling on her phone for the first time in 10 minutes. Excuse me? No, I repeated louder this time. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. This is not a boarding house. This is not a hotel for wayward relatives. This is our home. We built it. We paid for it. And I am not having a stranger. And yes, Greg is a stranger to me, living in my upstairs hallway. Mom, please, Brandon said, rubbing his temples. Don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. Help me. I turned on him. You're trying to help yourself, Brandon. You want to move to the city, so you need to displace Greg, and you decided your parents were the path of least resistance. You're using us as a storage unit for your wife's problems. That is incredibly offensive, Carrie said, her voice dropping to an icy chill. Greg is family. Brandon and I are a team. His family is my family, and my family is his family. If you reject Greg, you're rejecting Brandon. That's manipulation, Carrie, Larry said, his voice quiet but firm. And it's a load of hogwash. We love Brandon, but we didn't marry Greg. Carrie stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. I told you they would be like this, she said to Brandon. I told you they were too stubborn to see reason. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. Here is the reality, Brittany. You can say no, all you want, but this is happening. Greg gave notice at his apartment last week. He has to be out by the 1st. He has nowhere else to go. Are you really going to make your son's brother-in-law homeless? Are you going to be the reason Brandon is stressed out of his mind at work, worrying about where his family is sleeping? I didn't tell him to give notice. I shouted. I didn't tell you to promise him my house. It's not just a house, Carrie snapped. It's a family asset. And right now, it's an underutilized asset. You're being selfish. You're rattling around in this big place while family is struggling. It's greedy, frankly. Greedy. The woman who was moving into a free townhouse so she could hoard money for a forever home was calling me greedy for wanting to live in the house I'd scrubbed floors in for 40 years. Brandon, I said, ignoring her. I looked at my son. Look at me. Look at your mother. Are you really going to let this happen? Are you going to move a man we barely know into the room where you grew up? Into the room where I read you bedtime stories? Brandon looked up. For a second, just a split second, I saw the boy I knew. I saw the guilt. I saw the shame. He opened his mouth, and I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to say, "You're right, Mom. I'm sorry. We'll figure something else out." But then Carrie cleared her throat. A sharp, warning noise. Brandon's eyes glazed over. The wall came back up. "Mom, it's just for a while," he mumbled, "until he gets back on his feet. It's not a big deal. You're making it a big deal." "It is a big deal." I slammed my hand on the table. The water glasses shook. "It is my life. And you didn't even ask. You didn't ask us. You announced it. Because we knew you'd react like this," Carrie said, picking up her purse. "Hysterical. Emotional. Irrational. This is exactly why you need help managing things. You're not thinking clearly." She walked to the door. "Greg will be here on Monday morning with the U-Haul. I'd suggest you clear out the closets in the upstairs bedrooms. Linda has a lot of clothes." "Don't you dare," Larry said, half rising from his chair. "Don't you bring a truck onto my property." "Or what, Larry?" Carrie challenged, pausing with her hand on the doorknob. "You'll call the police on your son's family? You'll have Brandon's brother-in-law arrested for trespassing? Imagine how that will look. Imagine how that will feel when you want to see your grandchildren one day." The threat landed perfectly. She knew exactly where to hit us. She knew that the fear of being cut off from Brandon and any future grandchildren was the only thing that could paralyze us. "We're leaving," Carrie said. "We clearly can't have a civilized conversation when you're in this state. Come on, Brandon." Brandon stood up. He looked at the untouched pot roast. He looked at the uncut pie. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to just go along with it, to just submit, so he wouldn't have to deal with the conflict. "Mom," he whispered. "Brandon," I said, tears finally spilling over. "Don't do this." He turned his back on me. He walked to the door, following the click-clack of his wife's heels. Monday morning, Carrie called out over her shoulder, "Please have the driveway clear." The door slammed shut. I stood there in the silence, the smell of cooling beef and congealing gravy filling the air. I looked at Larry. He had slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "They can't do this, Brittany," he whispered. "Can they?" I walked to the window and watched their taillights disappear down the long, dark road. My sadness was starting to evaporate, replaced by something colder, something harder. "They think they can," I said softly. "They think we're just old furniture they can rearrange. They think the farm is just a piece of property." I picked up the pie server from the table and wiped the sticky filling off with a napkin. I held the silver handle tight, feeling the weight of it. But they forgot one thing, Larry, I said, turning back to my husband. What's that? He asked, looking up. They forgot whose name is on the deed. I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, that deep, heavy silence that settles over the countryside after midnight. But my mind was screaming. Beside me, Larry was breathing in a shallow, restless rhythm. I knew he wasn't really sleeping either. He was just lying there with his eyes closed, trying to make the world stop spinning. I stared at the ceiling fan, a dark shape against the shadows. I've looked at that fan for 30 years. I remember the day Larry installed it. I was pregnant with Brandon, my ankles swollen to the size of grapefruits, sweating through a humid July. Larry had come in from the fields, exhausted, covered in dust, but he spent 2 hours wrestling with the wiring just so I could have a breeze while I rested. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. We work. We build. We take care of each other. I threw the quilt off my legs. It felt suffocating. I got up, grabbing my robe, and padded barefoot down the hallway. I didn't turn on the lights. I know every creak of these floorboards. I know exactly where the runner rug slips a little to the left. This house is in my bones. I went into the kitchen. The dirty dishes from dinner were still in the sink. I hadn't had the heart to wash them after they left. The sight of the half-eaten pecan pie made my stomach turn. I walked past it to the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool. I wrapped my arms around myself and looked out at the dark shapes of the barn and the fence line. My son thinks this is just property. He thinks it's just an asset. He doesn't remember the beginning. He wasn't there when Larry and I bought this place 40 years ago. It wasn't a working farm then. It was a foreclosure, a wreck of a house with a caved-in roof and fields choked with weeds. We didn't have money. We had grit. I remember scraping layers of rot off these porch railings until my hands blistered. I remember Larry working double shifts, farming by day, fixing tractors for neighbors by night, just so we could afford the mortgage. We ate beans and rice for 3 years straight. We didn't go on vacations. We didn't buy new cars. We poured every single dollar, every drop of sweat into this dirt. And we did it for Brandon. That's the part that hurts the most. Every fence post Larry drove into the ground, he'd say, "This will be here for the boy." Every tree I planted, I imagined my grandchildren swinging from the branches. How did we get here? How did we get to the point where my son looks at our life's work and sees nothing but a free apartment for his brother-in-law? I sat down on the porch swing. It squeaked, a lonely sound. I started to replay the last 4 years in my head. I started to look at the past, not with the rose-colored glasses of a mother who just wants everyone to be happy, but with the clear, hard eyes of a woman who has been played. I realized tonight wasn't a sudden explosion. It was just the final scene in a long, slow movie I hadn't realized I was watching. It started with Carrie. I remember the first time Brandon brought her home. He was so proud. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. I wanted to love her. I really did. I wanted a daughter. But from the moment she stepped out of the car, there was a wall. She didn't want to take a tour of the farm. She said she had allergies. She didn't want to look at the old photo albums. She said looking at the past was morbid. I brushed it off. I told Larry, she's just a city girl. She's nervous. She'll warm up. But she never did. I thought about the wedding. I wanted to help. I offered to pay for the flowers to host the rehearsal dinner. Carrie smiled that tight, thin smile of hers and said, "That's sweet, Brittany, but we want something more elevated. We'll handle it." I was pushed to the side. I was a guest at my own son's wedding. I sat where she told me to sit. I wore the color she told me to wear. I didn't make a fuss because I didn't want to be that mother-in-law. You know, the one, the overbearing, meddling monster everyone makes jokes about. I was so afraid of being that stereotype that I made myself invisible. I thought if I was small enough, if I was nice enough, she would let me in. I was wrong. I thought about the busy years. That's what I call them now. The last 3 years where Brandon stopped coming around. We're just so busy with work, Mom. Carrie's really tired this weekend, Mom. We can't make it for Thanksgiving, Mom. Carrie's family is doing a thing. I believed it. I made excuses for them. I told Larry. They're young professionals building their careers. It's a busy time. But sitting on that porch in the dark, I finally admitted the truth to myself. They weren't too busy. She was steering the ship. Every time Brandon wanted to come home, she had a reason why they couldn't. Every time I called, she was in the background, rushing him off the phone. She was weaning him off us. She was rewriting his history. She was replacing his loyalty to us with loyalty to her and her demands. And the worst part, I let it happen. I stayed silent to keep the peace. I swallowed the insults. When she made fun of my clothes, I laughed. When she criticized my cooking, I apologized. When she rolled her eyes at Larry's stories, I changed the subject. I taught her that she could treat us like dirt, and we would thank her for it, just for the scrap of attention she allowed Brandon to give us. I created this monster. By refusing to draw a line in the sand, I showed her that there were no boundaries. And now, because there are no boundaries, she thinks she can just walk in and take the house. I looked out at the barn again. The moon was coming out from behind a cloud, lighting up the silver roof. No more, I whispered to the night air. The sadness in my chest was starting to harden into something else. It felt like cold iron. I realized I had been mourning the loss of a relationship that didn't exist. I was mourning the loss of a daughter who never wanted me. I was mourning the closeness of a son who had already left the building years ago. If I let Greg move in, it wouldn't bring Brandon closer. It would just make us servants in our own home. It would be the final nail in the coffin. We would be the old, foolish parents paying the bills while Carrie's family lived the life we built. I stood up from the swing. My joints popped, but I felt stronger than I had all day. I wasn't going to be the nice, quiet mother-in-law anymore. That woman died tonight at the dinner table when her son chose his wife's greed over his mother's dignity. I went back inside the kitchen. I turned on the light. The sudden brightness hurt my eyes, but I didn't blink. I walked over to the counter, picked up the pie server, and carried it to the sink. I washed it, scrubbing off the dried sugar and pecans until the silver shone. I dried it and put it back in the drawer. Then I went to the calendar on the wall. Monday. That's when she said Greg was coming. Monday morning. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. on Sunday. I had 48 hours. I wasn't going to spend them crying. I wasn't going to spend them begging Brandon to change his mind. I knew he wouldn't. He was too weak, too under her thumb. If I wanted to save this farm, I had to stop thinking like a mother and start thinking like a general. I walked down the hall to the small office Larry keeps his paperwork in. I turned on the desk lamp. I started pulling out files. The deed, the insurance papers, the original mortgage documents from 1985. Larry appeared in the doorway, blinking in the light, his hair tousled from sleep. "Brittany," he asked, his voice groggy, "what are you doing?" "It's the middle of the night." I looked up at him over a stack of yellowing papers. I didn't smile. "Go back to sleep, Larry," I said. "I'm looking for the name of that estate lawyer. The one who helped the Millers when their kids tried to sell their land out from under them." Larry rubbed his eyes. "You think we need a lawyer?" "I don't think we need a lawyer, Larry," I said, opening the heavy file cabinet. "I know we do. Peace is over. It's time for war." I spent Sunday morning in a fog. I had barely slept after digging through the file cabinets until 3 a.m. I had the name of the lawyer, Robert Halloway, the man who saved the Miller farm 3 towns over, written on a sticky note in my pocket. But it was Sunday. His office was closed. I had to wait until Monday morning to make the call. I thought I had 24 hours to prepare. I thought I had a day to sit with Larry, drink coffee, and figure out how to stand our ground before the invasion began. I was wrong. It was around 1 p.m. Larry was sitting in his recliner, staring at a football game with the volume turned down low, but I knew he wasn't watching. He was just looking at the screen to avoid looking at me, to avoid talking about the elephant in the room. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters for the 3rd time, just trying to keep my hands busy. Then I heard it, the heavy rumble of an engine coming up the drive. It wasn't a car. It sounded like a tank. My stomach dropped. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. A beat-up, oversized pickup truck was rolling up our driveway, kicking up dust. It had a rusted bumper and a "Don't Tread on Me" sticker on the back glass. It pulled right up to the front walkway, 2 wheels crushing the edge of my marigold bed. "Larry," I said, my voice sharp, "someone's here." Larry didn't move. Probably just the delivery man, Britt. "It's not a delivery," I said, watching the driver's door open. A pair of heavy work boots hit the ground, followed by Greg, Carrie's brother. He wasn't waiting for Monday. He stood there for a second, stretching his back and looking up at the house like he was inspecting a piece of merchandise he just bought at a yard sale. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look like a property manager. He looked like trouble. He didn't knock. He just walked right in. The front door opened, and suddenly he was in my entryway. "Hello? Anybody home?" he bellowed, his voice booming off the walls. I walked into the hall, wiping my hands on my apron. "Greg, what are you doing here?" He grinned, a lopsided, overly confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Brittany, just thought I'd get a jump on things. You know me, always eager to get to work. I figured I'd come scope out the lay of the land before Linda and the kids get here tomorrow with the U-Haul." Scope out the lay of the land. I repeated. "Greg, we talked about Monday. We aren't ready for you." "Oh, don't worry about me," he said, waving a hand dismissively. He walked past me into the living room, his muddy boots leaving faint prints on my clean rug. "I'm low maintenance." "Hey, Larry." "Watching the game." Larry looked up, startled. He blinked, looking from Greg to me, looking lost. Hey, Greg." "Yeah, just watching the game." "Good man," Greg said, clapping Larry on the shoulder a little too hard. Larry flinched. "Listen, don't get up. I'm just going to head out back to the barn. I got some ideas for a workshop I want to set up. Need to take some measurements." "A workshop?" Larry asked, his voice weak. "What kind of workshop?" "Custom woodwork," Greg said, puffing out his chest. "I've got a business plan. High-end, rustic furniture. This place is perfect for it. Lots of space. Free rent means low overhead. I'm going to make a killing." He turned and headed for the back door before we could respond. "I'll just let myself out." I stood there, frozen. My blood was boiling. He was walking through my house, talking about his business plan on my property, while my husband sat there and took it. "Larry," I hissed, "are you going to let him go into your barn? That's your space. Your tools are out there." Larry sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "Brittany, what do you want me to do? Throw him out? If I kick him out, Carrie calls Brandon. Brandon gets mad. We lose him. Let the boy look at the barn. It's just a barn. It's not just a barn." I whispered furiously. "It's the principle." But Larry wouldn't look at me. He turned back to the TV. I wasn't going to let this happen. I turned and marched out the back door after Greg. I found him standing in the middle of the main barn aisle. He had a yellow tape measure out and was stretching it across the entrance to the tractor bay. He was humming to himself. "Greg," I said, stepping into the barn. The smell of hay and diesel fuel usually calmed me, but today it smelled like invasion. "Hey, Brittany," he said, not looking up. "This space is great. Little dusty, needs better lighting, but the bones are good. I'm thinking if we knock down that partition wall over there." He pointed to the area where Larry kept his vintage tool collection. "I can open this up for my saw table." "You are not knocking down any walls," I said, my voice shaking. "That is Larry's workbench. He's had that since 1990. Greg finally looked at me. He retracted the tape measure with a loud snap. He looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Brittany, look, Carrie said you guys were going to be resistant to change. I get it. You're set in your ways. But Larry's retired, right? What does he need all this space for? He's just tinkering. I'm trying to build a livelihood here. We need to prioritize." Prioritize. He was prioritizing his imaginary business over my husband's actual life. "We haven't agreed to any of this," I said. "We haven't signed anything." Greg laughed, a short, dry bark of a laugh. "Come on, Brittany, don't be like that. We're family. Contracts are for strangers. Besides, Brandon said it was a done deal. You don't want to make a liar out of your son, do you?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. Speaking of space, I noticed that shed on the side of the garage, the one with all the pots and trellis stuff. "My potting shed," I said defensively. "What about it?" "Yeah, that," he nodded. "I'm going to need you to clear that out by tomorrow." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Excuse me?" "My truck," he gestured with his thumb over his shoulder toward the driveway. "It's a dually. It won't fit in the standard garage bay. I need to park it under the lean-to, but that shed of yours is blocking the clearance. If we knock that shed down, or, just move your stuff to the basement, I can park the truck there. Keep the rust off it." I stared at him. My potting shed, the place where I start my tomato seedlings every February, the place where I go to have a cup of tea when the rain is falling. He wanted to tear it down so he could park his monster truck. "You want me to destroy my garden shed for your truck?" "It's just some pots and dirt, Brittany," he said, rolling his eyes. "You can garden anywhere. I need to protect my vehicle. It's my work asset. You don't have a job, Greg." I snapped. I couldn't help it. It just came out. Greg's face hardened. The fake smile vanished. He took a step toward me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine fear. He wasn't just a goofball. He was a man who felt the world owed him something. And those men are dangerous when you say no. "I'm an entrepreneur," he said, his voice low, "and I'm moving in tomorrow. Carrie said you'd be helpful. Don't make me call her and tell her you're harassing me. You know how she gets. You know what she'll tell Brandon." He let the threat hang there. She'll tell Brandon to cut you off." "I'm going to finish measuring," he said, turning his back on me. "Why don't you go inside and make some coffee? I take mine black." I stood there for a moment, trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab a pitchfork and chase him off the property. But then I looked through the barn doors at the house. I saw the back of Larry's head through the living room window. He hadn't moved. He wasn't coming to save me. He was too broken, too afraid of losing the little scrap of connection he had left with his son. If I screamed now, Greg would call Carrie. Carrie would call Brandon. Brandon would call us, angry and defensive. Larry would cave, and I would look like the crazy, mean old woman. I realized then, standing in the dust of my own barn, that I was completely alone. Larry had tapped out. Brandon had switched sides. It was just me. If I fought him head-on right now, I would lose. He had the leverage. He had the emotional hostage, my son. I needed a different kind of weapon. I took a deep breath. I forced my hands to unclench. Fine, I said to Greg's back. He paused, looking over his shoulder, surprised. Fine, fine, I repeated. My voice was calm, eerily calm. Measure whatever you want, Greg. I'll go make the coffee. That's the spirit, Brittany, he grinned, turning back to the wall he planned to destroy. We'll get along just fine. I walked back to the house. I didn't make coffee. I walked straight past Larry, who didn't look up. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. I pulled the sticky note with the lawyer's number out of my pocket. I smoothed it out on the dresser. They thought they had won. They thought they had bullied the old lady into submission. They thought I was weak because I was quiet, but they were about to learn a very hard lesson. You never, ever corner a woman who has nothing left to lose. Tomorrow was Monday, and tomorrow I was going to war. Monday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that matched the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I woke up before the alarm. Larry was still asleep, curled on his side, looking smaller than usual. I watched him for a moment, my heart aching. He was broken. The confrontation with Greg yesterday had taken the fight out of him. He was terrified that if we pushed back, Brandon would cut us off completely. He was willing to live in his own basement, just to keep the peace. But I wasn't. I got out of bed and dressed in my town clothes, slacks and a nice blouse. I put on my pearl earrings. I needed armor. I went into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. While it brewed, I picked up the phone. My hand hovered over the keypad. This was the hardest part. I had to swallow my pride. I had to lie to my own son. I dialed Brandon's number. He answered on the second ring, sounding wary. Hello. Good morning, Brandon, I said. I forced my voice to sound tired, defeated. I pitched it just a little higher, making myself sound older than I was. Mom. He hesitated. Is everything okay? Look, if this is about Greg. It is, I said, cutting him off gently. I wanted to apologize. For yesterday, and for Saturday night. There was a silence on the other end. Then I heard a rustle and Carrie's muffled voice in the background asking, Is that her? You're apologizing? Brandon asked, sounding confused. Yes, I said. Larry and I talked all night. We realized, you're right, we are getting older. The farm is a lot of work. Maybe we do need help. Maybe having Greg here wouldn't be the worst thing. We just want you to be happy, Brandon. That's all we've ever wanted. I heard him exhale a long, relieved breath. Oh, Mom, thank you. You don't know how much easier this makes things. I was really worried. I know, I said. I was just emotional. It was a shock. But I'm looking at the guest room now, and I'm thinking we can clear out the closet today. Get it ready for them. That's great, Brandon said. His voice was lighter, happy again. Carrie, Mom says it's fine. She's clearing the room. I heard Carrie take the phone. Brittany? Hi, Carrie, I said, gritting my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Well, I'm glad you finally saw reason, she said. No thank you. No apology for calling me greedy. Just a smug satisfaction. It really is for the best. Greg is packing up the truck now. He should be there by late afternoon with the first load of boxes. Just make sure the driveway is clear. We'll be ready, I said. We want to make this work. Good, she said. We'll see you this weekend to check on things. Click. She hung up on me. I stood there holding the dead phone. My blood boiling so hot, I thought I might catch fire. I'm glad you finally saw reason. Oh, I saw reason. All right, I whispered to the empty kitchen. I saw exactly who you are. I poured a cup of coffee and drank it standing up. Then I went to find Larry. He was in the living room putting on his boots. I called them, I said. Larry looked up, panic in his eyes. You didn't start a fight, did you? No, I said calmly. I told them they were right. I told them Greg could move in. Larry's shoulders slumped in relief. Oh, good. That's good, Britt. It's better this way. No use fighting it. Exactly. I lied. Now listen to me, Larry. I have to go into town to run some errands. I need you to stay here. If Greg shows up early, just let him do what he wants. Don't argue. Don't get in his way. Just say, welcome home. Can you do that? Sure, Britt, he nodded. I'll be in the barn. I grabbed my purse and the folder of documents I had gathered the night before. I walked out to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that still ran like a top because Larry took such good care of it. I backed out of the driveway, taking one last look at my house. It looked vulnerable, exposed, but I was going to get protection. I drove 30 minutes into town, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I parked in front of a brick building on Main Street. Halloway and Associates, attorneys at law. Robert Halloway was a man in his 70s, sharp as a tack, with eyes that had seen every kind of family dispute you could imagine. He had been Larry's father's lawyer. He knew the history of our land. His receptionist showed me in immediately. Robert stood up from his mahogany desk, extending a hand. Brittany, it's been years. To what do I owe the pleasure? Larry couldn't make it. Larry is indisposed, I said, taking a seat. And this isn't a pleasure visit, Robert. I have a problem. I laid it all out. I told him everything. The dinner, the demand, the way Carrie talked to us, Greg measuring the barn, the threat to cut us off from our grandchildren. I didn't leave anything out. I kept my voice steady, but by the time I finished, I was gripping the arms of the chair, so hard my fingers were numb. Robert sat back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He didn't look shocked. He looked angry. And they want to move in today? He asked. This afternoon, I said. I told them yes. I bought myself some time. Smart, Robert nodded. Never let the enemy know you're armed until you're ready to shoot. He reached for the folder I had brought. Let's look at the deed. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the yellowed paper. Just as I thought. Fee simple absolute. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. You and Larry own this property 100%. Brandon's name is nowhere on this title. He has no legal claim to this land until both of you are deceased. They said it's a family asset. They said I was being greedy. They can say the moon is made of cheese, Brittany, but that doesn't make it true, Robert scoffed. Legally, Greg has as much right to move into your house as I do, which is 0. I know I can say no, I said, but if I just say no, I lose my son. They'll paint me as the villain. They'll say I didn't want to help family. I need to change the game. Carrie keeps talking about how this is a business decision. She says they need to manage the asset. Robert's eyes twinkled. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. Ah, he said, she wants to play business? Then let's give her business. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. If Greg is moving in to manage the property, he isn't a house guest. He's a contractor. And if he is living in a separate dwelling unit, or even a room within the main dwelling, he is a tenant. Exactly, I said. I want to draft a lease. Not just a lease, Robert corrected, his pen scratching furiously across the paper. We are going to draft a commercial mixed-use agreement. If he is using the barn for a workshop, that's commercial use. If he is living in the bedroom, that's residential tenancy. He looked up at me. What's the going rate for a 2-bedroom apartment in town? About $2,000, I guessed, and a commercial workshop of that square footage. Robert asked, another $2,000, easy, plus utilities, plus liability insurance. if he's running saws and drills on your property, you can't be liable if he cuts a finger off. He needs to be bonded. He doesn't have a job, Robert, I said. He can't pay that. That, Robert said, leaning forward, is not your problem. If they want to treat your home like an asset, then it has a market value. You are simply respecting their wishes to professionalize the relationship. We spent the next hour drafting the document. It was beautiful. It was brutal. It covered everything. Rent, security deposit, pet deposit for the inevitable dog Greg would probably get. Quiet hours. A clause that strictly prohibited structural changes, like tearing down my potting shed without written consent and a licensed contractor. At the end, Robert typed it up and printed 2 copies. He stapled them with a satisfying thwack. He slid the heavy document across the desk to me. This is a fortress, Brittany, but I have to warn you. When you hand them this, you aren't just drawing a line. You are building a wall. They will be furious. I picked up the papers. They felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the pie server, heavier than the guilt I had been carrying for 4 years. They already built the wall. Robert, I said, standing up, I'm just putting a gate on it, and I'm the only one with the key. One more thing, Robert said. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small red sign. Put this in the potting shed window. I looked at it. Posted private property. No trespassing. Thank you, I said. I drove home, feeling different. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. I felt clear. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Greg's truck. He was already there. He had backed it right up to the front porch, the tires crushing the edge of the grass. He was hauling a dirty mattress up my front steps, banging it against the doorframe. Larry was standing by the barn, watching him, looking helpless. Greg saw me pull up. He stopped, wiping sweat from his forehead. Hey, Brittany, got an early start. Where were you? I need to know where to put my beer fridge. I got out of the car. I clutched the folder to my chest. Just put it in the hallway for now. Greg, I called out, forcing a smile. We'll sort everything out this evening. Sounds good, he yelled back. Hey, Carrie and Brandon are coming over around 6 to celebrate the move-in. Pizza's on them. Perfect, I said. I walked past him, past the dirty mattress, and into the house. I went straight to the dining room table, the same table where they had broken my heart 2 nights ago. I placed the folder in the center of the table. Let them come. Let them bring the pizza. Let them celebrate their victory. I was ready to serve the main course. 6 o'clock came, and with it, the noise. I was standing in the kitchen, arranging napkins in a holder, when the front door burst open. There was no knock. No, hello, Mom. Just the sound of heavy footsteps, the crinkle of cardboard boxes, and the loud, chaotic energy of people claiming a space that wasn't theirs. Pizza's here. Greg bellowed from the hallway, and I brought the beer. I walked into the dining room. The sight that greeted me almost made my mask slip. My beautiful mahogany dining table, the one I polished with lemon oil every Sunday, was covered in grease-stained cardboard boxes from Tony's Pizza Palace. Greg had already thrown his keys on the sideboard, scratching the finish. He was wearing the same dirty flannel shirt from yesterday, and he was dragging a cooler across my hardwood floor. Hey, Brittany, he grinned, popping the tab on a beer can. It hissed loudly. Hope you're hungry. We got the works. Pepperoni, sausage, extra cheese. None of that veggie stuff. Behind him, Brandon and Carrie walked in. Brandon was carrying a stack of pillows, and Carrie was carrying nothing. She walked in with her purse over her shoulder, looking around the room with a critical eye, like a supervisor inspecting a job site. Hi, Mom, Brandon said, giving me a quick, relieved smile. Smells good in here. Did you make coffee? I did, I said, forcing the corners of my mouth up. And I have iced tea for everyone. Welcome. Carrie stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at me, then at the pizza, then at the boxes Greg had already piled in the corner. She let out a long breath, dropping her shoulders. "Well," she said, "this is much better. Isn't it nice when we can all just get along?" "It is," I said sweetly. "Come sit down. Larry, come get a slice." Larry shuffled in from the living room. He looked like a ghost in his own house. He took a paper plate and sat at the far end of the table, as far away from Greg as possible. We all sat down. The atmosphere was strange. It was celebratory, but only for them. For Larry and me, it felt like a wake. But I didn't let it show. I played the part perfectly. I was the gracious hostess. I got up to refill glasses. I fetched extra napkins when Greg wiped his greasy hands on his jeans. I smiled until my face hurt. "So, Greg," I said once everyone had a slice in front of them, "tell us about your plans. Now that you're here, what's the first project?" I saw Larry's head snap up. He looked at me with betrayal in his eyes. He couldn't believe I was encouraging this. But he didn't know the plan. Greg didn't need to be asked twice. He swallowed a massive bite of pizza and gestured with his crust. "Oh man, so much potential here. First thing, that potting shed has got to go. Like I told you, I need the parking space. I'm thinking we knock that down on Wednesday." "Wednesday," I repeated, nodding. Very ambitious. "And the barn," Greg continued, pointing a greasy finger at Larry. "Larry, buddy, you got a lot of junk in there. Old tractors, rusted tools. We need to clear that out. I'm thinking we have a big bonfire this weekend. Burn the trash, sell the scrap metal. Use the cash to buy lumber for my workshop." Larry gripped his fork. "Those aren't junk," he whispered. "That's a 1955 Ford tractor. It's a classic." "It's rust, Larry," Carrie interjected, wiping her mouth daintily. "Greg is right. If you want the farm to be productive, you have to get rid of the dead weight. You can't be sentimental about garbage." "Right," Greg said. "And inside the house, Linda and I were talking. The wallpaper in that upstairs hallway, hideous. No offense, Brittany, but it screams 1980s. We're going to strip that, maybe paint it a nice slate gray. Modernize it. And the carpet in the guest room. I mean, the master suite. Now, we're going to rip that up. I've got allergies." They sat there in my dining room, eating my food, and dismantled my life piece by piece. They talked about painting over my memories. They talked about burning my husband's hobbies. They talked about cutting down the oak tree by the driveway because it drops too many leaves on the cars. And through it all, I just nodded. "I see," I said. "That sounds like a lot of work." "It is," Carrie said, leaning back in her chair. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "But that's why we're doing this. To help you. You two clearly couldn't keep up with it. The place was falling apart. It wasn't falling apart. It was pristine." But I didn't correct her. "You know, Brittany," Carrie said, her voice dropping to that condescending tone she used when she thought she was being benevolent, "I have to admit, I was worried about you on Saturday. You seemed unstable. But I'm really glad you finally learned to be reasonable. It takes a big person to admit when they're too old to handle things." The room went quiet. Brandon winced, looking down at his plate. "Carrie, what?" Carrie shrugged. "It's true. Brittany knows it. That's why we're here. We're saving the farm." She looked at me, expecting me to bow my head, expecting me to say, "Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for saving us." I looked at her. I looked at the grease stain on her lip. I looked at the way she sat in my chair, like a queen on a throne. "You're right, Carrie," I said softly. I was emotional, but I realized that if we are going to do this, we need to do it right. We need to be professional. "Exactly," Carrie nodded. "Professional." And since Greg is going to be managing the property, I continued, and running a business from the barn, we need to make sure everyone is protected. We need to make sure everything is clear. Clear is good, Greg said, reaching for another slice. I like clear. I'm glad you agree. I said. I stood up. I actually prepared a little something, just to make sure we're all on the same page. You know, since this is a business arrangement now. Carrie raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? Just some standard paperwork. I said casually. Housekeeping, really? Brandon, you know how it is. You're a lawyer. You never enter an agreement without writing it down. Brandon nodded, looking relieved that I was speaking his language. Yeah, sure, Mom. That makes sense. What is it? A list of emergency contacts. Wi-Fi passwords. Something like that, I said. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the blue folder. I held it against my chest for a second. My heart was hammering a calm, steady rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. I walked back to the table. I moved the pizza box aside. I placed the folder in front of Brandon. Since Greg is moving in immediately, I said, my voice smooth as silk, and since he plans to start construction on the barn this week, I thought it was best to get the lease signed tonight. Before dessert, Carrie froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. Lease, she asked. The word came out sharp. Commercial mixed-use agreement. Actually, I corrected her gently. Robert Halloway drew it up this morning. It covers the residential tenancy for the upstairs suite and the commercial lease for the barn workshop. It's very standard. Brandon stared at the folder. He didn't open it. He looked up at me, confused. Mama lease? For Greg? Well, yes, I said, widening my eyes in mock innocence. Carrie said this was a business decision. She said the farm is an asset. You don't let a tenant move into an asset without a contract, do you, Brandon? That would be irresponsible management. I looked at Greg. He had stopped chewing. So, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a pen. I clicked it. The sound was loud in the silent room. Let's get this signed so Greg can unload the rest of his truck. Who wants to go first? Brandon reached out and took the blue folder. His hand was steady, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He's a lawyer, a corporate attorney. He knows what legal documents look like. He knows the weight of paper. He opened the cover, and the room went so quiet you could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Greg was still chewing, oblivious. He reached for a second beer, the pop of the tab cracking the silence like a whip. So what is it? Carrie asked, leaning over Brandon's shoulder. Just a standard liability waiver, or maybe a house rule list. No loud music after 10 foot. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. We can agree to that. Brandon didn't laugh. He was staring at the first page, his eyes scanning the bold text at the top. His face went pale. Not just white, but gray. He turned the page, then the next, reading faster now. His brow furrowed. Mom, Brandon said, his voice tight. This isn't house rules. No, I said, taking a sip of my iced tea. It's a lease. Robert Halloway drafted it this morning. A lease? Greg asked, his mouth full. Like, I got a sign for the keys. Read page 3, Brandon, I said calmly. Subsection B. The rent schedule. Carrie snatched the folder from Brandon's hands. Rent schedule? What are you talking about? There is no rent. That was the whole point. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the color drain from her face, replaced instantly by a flush of angry red. Her mouth dropped open. $4,500? She shrieked. The number hung in the air. Greg choked on his beer. What? Who pays that? You do, Greg, I said, locking eyes with him. Or rather, the tenant does. Let me break it down for you, since we are treating this professionally. I stood up and walked around the table, standing behind Larry's chair. I put a hand on his shoulder. He sat up a little straighter, feeling my strength. The upstairs suite is a 2-bedroom, fully furnished living space with a private bath, I explained, counting on my fingers. Market rate in this county for a short-term, furnished rental is $2,000 a month. That's a discount, really, considering it includes housekeeping, since I assume I'll be the one cleaning the mud off the floors. That's insane, Carrie spat. It's a farmhouse, not a penthouse. It's my home, I corrected her. And then there is the barn. Greg, you want to use the main bay for a commercial woodworking business. That is a commercial industrial lease. $2,500 a month. That includes use of the electricity, which is heavy machinery voltage, and access to the driveway for your clients. I can't afford that. Greg shouted, standing up. I don't have a job yet. That's why I'm here. I know, I said sympathetically. That's why I included Clause 4. The security deposit, first and last month's rent required upon signing. That's $9,000 due tonight. You are out of your mind. Carrie slammed the folder shut. This is a joke. Brandon, tell her this is a joke. Brandon looked at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, this is a lot. We can't. Greg doesn't have $9,000. The whole point was to help him get on his feet. And I am helping, I said. I'm offering him a prime location for his startup. But there is one more thing. Clause 7. I pointed to the folder. Brandon opened it again, his hands shaking slightly. Liability and insurance. Brandon read aloud. Tenant must provide proof of a $10,000 surety bond for commercial operations and pass a criminal background check before occupying the premises. A background check. Greg's face went dark. What are you trying to say, Brittany? You think I'm a criminal? I don't know, Greg, I said honestly. I don't know you. You are a stranger who wants to live in the hallway outside my bedroom door. You want to operate power saws next to my husband's vintage tractor. No insurance company in the world would cover that risk without a bond. If you burn the barn down, who pays for it? Me? Larry? I don't think so. That's bad asset management. Carrie stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. You can't do this, she screamed. The mask was completely off now. The cool, sophisticated executive was gone. She was just a woman who was losing control, and she hated it. We are family, she yelled, pointing a finger at my face. You are doing this to your own son. You are trying to bankrupt us. How dare you hide behind legal paperwork? We're supposed to help each other. Help? I asked, my voice rising for the first time. Is that what you call it? You called me greedy, Carrie. You told my husband he was too old to manage his own land. You threatened to cut us off from our grandchildren if we didn't let your brother displace us. You didn't come here to ask for help. You came here to take. We are doing what is best for the future. Carrie argued, and you are being a bitter, selfish old woman. Family doesn't displace family, Carrie, I said, cutting her off. My voice was hard as steel. You said you wanted to manage the asset. Well, this is the cost of the asset. You wanted to run a business here. Here is the overhead. You wanted to treat me like a landlord. Fine. I'm the landlord. And rent is due. I looked at Brandon. You're a lawyer, son. Look at the deed attached to the back. He flipped to the last page. Who owns this house? I asked. You and Dad, he whispered. Does your name appear on it? No. Does Carrie's? No. So, I said, looking back at Greg, who was looking nervously at the door, if you do not sign this lease, and you do not pay the deposit, you have no legal right to be here. In fact, I checked my watch. If you are not off this property in 30 minutes, you are trespassing. Trespassing. Carrie laughed, a frantic, high-pitched sound. You're going to call the cops on us? On your son? I won't call them on Brandon. I said, but Greg is not my son. He is an intruder who is threatening to tear down my property. If he is still here at 7 p.m., I will call Sheriff Miller. And you know Miller. He went to high school with Larry. He doesn't like trespassers. This is unbelievable, Greg muttered. He looked at Carrie. You said this was a done deal. You said they were pushovers. I gave up my apartment for this. It was a done deal. Carrie shrieked at him. She's having an episode. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. If you do this, Brittany, if you kick him out, you will never see us again. I mean it. You will die alone in this big, empty house. You will never meet your grandchildren. I will make sure of it. It was the ultimate threat, the one she had used to silence us for years, the weapon she kept in her back pocket. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing, no fear, no sadness, just clarity. Carrie, I said softly, you were never going to let me see my grandchildren anyway. You've spent 4 years pushing us away. You've spent 4 years making sure Brandon forgets where he came from. You treat us like an obligation, not a family. I'm not losing my grandchildren tonight. I'm saving my self-respect. I turned to Brandon. He was looking at his wife like he had never seen her before. He was hearing the venom in her voice, seeing the greed in her eyes. Brandon, I said, I love you. You are my son. You are always welcome here. But I will not set myself on fire to keep your wife's family warm. I will not let them steal what your father and I built. Brandon looked down at the lease. He looked at the ridiculous terms that were only ridiculous because they were real. He looked at Greg, who was wiping pizza grease on his jeans. He looked at Carrie, who was practically vibrating with rage. Then he looked at his father. Larry was sitting quietly, but he was looking at Brandon with a steady, waiting gaze. Mom's right, Brandon said. His voice was quiet. Excuse me? Carrie whipped her head around. She's right, Brandon said, louder this time. He closed the folder. We can't ask them to do this. It's their house. We pushed too hard. We pushed. Carrie screamed. You are taking her side. After everything we planned. We planned to live with your mom, Brandon said. We didn't plan to bulldoze mine. Greg, I'm sorry. We can't stay here. You gotta be kidding me. Greg threw his hands up. So I'm homeless? That's it. We'll get you a motel, Brandon said, reaching for his wallet. We'll figure it out. But you can't live here. I am not going to a motel. Greg shouted. I have a truck full of furniture outside. That sounds like a you problem, I said, using Carrie's favorite phrase. Greg glared at me. He looked like he wanted to flip the table. He looked at the pizza, then at the door. He grabbed his keys off the sideboard. You people are crazy, he spat. Wasting my time. I should sue you for breach of verbal contract. Read the lease, Greg, I said calmly. There was no contract. Just a conversation you weren't invited to. He stormed out. The front door slammed, so hard the windows rattled. We heard the truck start up outside, the engine roaring angrily. He revved it, tires spinning on the gravel, spraying rocks everywhere as he peeled out of the driveway. The room was silent again. The pizza was cold. The folder sat in the middle of the table like a judge's gavel. Carrie stood there, breathing hard. She was alone now. Her muscle was gone. Her husband had defected. Her plan had crumbled. She looked at me with pure hatred. I hope you're happy, she hissed. You got what you wanted. You kept your precious house. I did, I said. She grabbed her purse. Come on, Brandon. We're leaving. And don't expect a call on Christmas. She marched to the door. She didn't look back. Brandon stood up slowly. He looked exhausted. He looked at me, then at Larry. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't see it until now. Go with your wife, Brandon, Larry said gently. She needs you right now. We'll be here. Brandon nodded. He walked to the door, pausing for a second in the frame, looking back at the kitchen where he grew up. Then he walked out into the night. I listened to their car start. I listened to them drive away. I let out a breath. I felt like I'd been holding for 3 days. My legs suddenly felt like jelly. I sat down in my chair, putting my hand over my heart. Larry reached across the table and took my other hand. His grip was strong again. The fear was gone from his eyes. You did good, Brittany, he said softly. You did real good. It's not over, Larry, I said, looking at the door. But the invasion is. I looked at the pizza boxes. I'm not cleaning this up. Larry chuckled. It was a rusty sound, but it was real. I'll get the trash. Britt, you go sit on the porch. I walked out to the porch and watched the dust settle on the driveway. The sun was going down, casting long shadows across the fields. The farm was quiet. It was ours again. I had drawn a line in the sand, and the tide had turned. But as I sat there, I wondered what happens when the tide comes back in. Because Carrie wasn't the type to give up. She was the type to regroup. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, I was the queen of my castle, and the rent was paid in full. The sun came up the next morning just like it always does. It didn't care that my family had exploded the night before. It just poured golden light over the fields, lighting up the dew on the grass and warming the wooden planks of the back porch. I sat there with my coffee mug wrapped in both hands, watching the steam rise. It was quiet, truly quiet. For the last 4 years, and especially the last 4 days, there had been a different kind of silence in this house. It was a heavy, anxious silence, the kind where you're walking on eggshells, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the next demand, waiting to see if you've done enough to please people who can't be pleased. But this morning, the silence was light. It was peaceful. It was mine. Larry came out a few minutes later. He didn't look like the beaten-down old man who had sat in the recliner on Sunday. He was wearing his work boots and his favorite cap. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat on the swing next to me. Greg's truck left some deep ruts in the driveway. Larry said, taking a sip, "We can rake them out." I said, "Yeah," he nodded. "We can." We sat there for a long time without speaking. We didn't need to. We both knew what the other was thinking. We were thinking about Brandon. I kept replaying that final moment in the hallway. I thought about the way Carrie had screamed at me, her face twisted and ugly, telling me I'd never see my grandchildren. That was supposed to be the knife in the heart. That was the threat that had kept me obedient for years. But sitting there in the morning sun, I realized something. That threat only works if you have hope. And I had finally let go of the false hope that Carrie would ever treat me like a mother. You can't lose something you never really had. If the price of seeing my future grandchildren was handing over my dignity and my home to a man like Greg, then the price was too high. I thought about Brandon lingering in the doorway, that look on his face. It wasn't anger. It was shame. For the first time in 4 years, the fog had lifted for him. He saw his wife not as the victim, but as the aggressor. He saw his mother not as an obstacle, but as a person. He didn't call me last night. He hasn't texted me this morning. And that's okay. He has his own mess to clean up now. He has to go back to that townhouse and live with the reality of who he married. I can't save him from that. He has to save himself. You know, Larry said, interrupting my thoughts. I was thinking about that potting shed. I tensed up. What about it? I was thinking I might expand it for you, he said, looking out at the garden. Build you some proper shelves. Maybe put in a skylight, since we don't have to tear it down for a dually truck anymore. I looked at my husband. His blue eyes were clear. He was planning for us again. He wasn't planning for them. I'd like that, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. I'd like that very much. I stood up and walked to the railing. I looked out at the barn, standing strong, and red against the green pasture. It wasn't a workshop for a failed entrepreneur. It wasn't an asset in a portfolio. It was just a barn. Our barn. I realized I had lost the illusion of a happy, perfect family. I wouldn't be the grandmother posting photos on Facebook of big family reunions this Christmas. There would probably be an empty seat at the table. But I had saved something far more important. I had saved my self-respect. I had taught my son that his mother is not a doormat. And I had reminded myself that I am not just a vessel for everyone else's needs. I am Brittany Rentis. I own this land. I own this life. I went back inside and walked past the dining room table. The blue folder was still there. I picked it up. I didn't shred it. I walked into the office and filed it away in the cabinet right next to the deed. I kept it as a reminder that peace is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the hardest word to say to your children is no, but it's also the most loving thing you can do. I walked back out to the porch, sat down next to Larry, and took his hand. So I said, "What do you want for dinner?" "I'm thinking we go out. Somewhere expensive, since we're saving so much money on house guests." Larry laughed. It was a full belly laugh. "Steak," he said, "and dessert." "Deal," I said. The driveway was empty. The house was safe. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready for it. And that is my story. I know it wasn't a fairy tale ending. My son is gone for now, and my daughter-in-law hates me, but I have my peace. So, I want to hear from you. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. I love reading where you all are from. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive and allows me to keep bringing you these real-life moments. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away.